Welcome to CAA's Google Chat to discuss CAA's Publication Grant Program. I'm Betty Leigh Hutcheson, and I'm joined here in the CAA office with Alex Gershuny, our editorial manager for publications. Joining us remotely will be Susan Higman Larson and Carl Whittington. Susan will join us from the Detroit Institute of Arts, where she's currently Director of Publishing. She has over 25 years experience in academic publishing, including web-based museum exhibition catalogs, scholarly journals, and more. She's been an editor at the National Gallery of Art in Washington and also at Dumbarton Oaks. And she currently serves on the advisory board of Wayne State University Press. Susan's also an adjunct faculty member at the Johns Hopkins University, where she teaches the practice of museum publishing. And we wanted, in particular, Susan to be here with us today, not only for her experience in publishing, but because she served as a past juror on one of our juries and will be able to offer a good deal of insight about that process. Whittington is Assistant Professor of Art History at Ohio State University, specializing in medieval and European art and architecture. His forthcoming book, Body Whirls, Officinus de Canistris in the Medieval Cartographic Imagination, is published by the Pontifical Institute for Medieval Studies in Toronto. Carl comes to us today because he's an applicant who received a Meese Authors Book Award, and his publisher received a Millard Meese Publication Fund Award. CAA offered 3 grants in 2013, the 2 I've just mentioned, and a third, the Wyeth Foundation for American Art Publication Grant. And I'd like to just tell you about the Millard Meese Publication Fund and its origins, because this began CAA's Publication Grant Program that we are able to continue today. It was established in 1975 with a gift from Millard Meese and his family to the College Art Association, with a directive that the funds were to be used for scholarly publishing in art history. Meese was a prominent figure in the world of art history for several decades, a distinguished scholar of medieval art and Renaissance art, and a prolific writer. He published several monographs and regularly published in the Art Bulletin. He was also the editor-in-chief of the Art Bulletin from 1940 to 1942. CAA is grateful to the Meese family and to other contributors to this fund, which allows CAA to make this continuing contribution to scholarly publishing. Through a grant from the Wyeth Foundation for American Art, CAA has offered a second subvention for 9 years. This subvention is for publishers. The Wyeth Foundation for American Art Publication Grant. Requirements for this grant include a very targeted subject matter, and Alex will provide some parameters for this grant in just a minute. We currently also offer an award to first-time authors, the Meese Authors Book Award, to offset the cost of acquiring images and licenses for publication. We're very grateful to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for providing funds for this much-needed award. So Alex manages all our grant applications and jury meetings, and so we'll turn to her to provide some information about the application process. Alex?
Great. So as Betty Leigh mentioned, CAA offers 3 publication grants. The Meese Fund and the Wyeth Grant are awarded to the publisher, and they're to be used for costs relating to the book's production and also editing, so proofreading or the cost of printing color images, other costs like that, while the Meese Mellon is awarded to the author, and it's solely to be used for image acquisition rather than for production. All of these grants are open to publishers internationally and in the U.S., and commercial presses, university presses, and museum presses are all welcome to apply and are eligible to receive grants. So all of these grants are for book-length scholarly manuscripts that are under contract with the publisher. The Meese Fund supports books in all fields and time periods in art history, visual studies, and related subjects, while the Wyeth Grant supports books on topics in American art through 1970. And for the purposes of the grant, American art is defined as art created in the US, in Canada, and in Mexico. The Meese Mellon Authors Book Award also supports books in all periods and areas of art history and visual studies, except for books on the built environment. The Society of Architectural Historians administers a similar grant that's for books on this subject. And the other important eligibility requirement to remember for the Meese Mellon Authors Book Award is that it supports a scholar's first publication. Books that are not eligible are excavation or other technical reports, articles, any previously published works, and that includes previously published essays or groups of essays, and also Congress proceedings. Museum and collection catalogs are eligible to receive a grant, but they should contain substantial scholarship, as the other books do. A publisher can submit an application for the same project at the same time to both the Meese Fund and the Wyeth grant. But if the book is awarded a Wyeth grant, it will not be considered for the Meese grant. Historically, the Wyeth jury has always met the week before the Meese jury. So then the Meese jury won't consider the book if it's already been awarded. A project that has been rejected for a grant cannot reapply for the same grant unless the publisher proves that substantial revisions have been made. And this should be made very clear in a cover letter or a separate letter, and the jury can choose whether or not it wants to reassess that book. So I also want to talk a little bit about the application requirements and application components. All of this information can be found on our website, so don't feel like you need to write everything down. There are separate pages for all three of the grants, and there are links to all of the components within this, so you can find that on the website. I'll start by talking about the Meese Fund and the Wyeth grant, and those have a very similar application process. So the application components include a form that the publisher fills out. PDFs of this form are on our website. They're very short, asking basic questions about the book. The publisher should also submit a budget. It mostly just needs to be easy to read, easy to understand by the jury. They really do, look at the budget closely. The publisher should also submit a cover letter, which talks about the importance of the project, for what purpose the grant funds would be used, talk about how this project meets the criteria of the grant. Because this book is awarded to the publisher and not to the author, it would also be helpful for the publisher to talk a little bit about how this book fits within the rest of their publishing program. Finally, for the cover letter, it should include how the amount of the grant requested. This is important and absolutely something that the jury wants to know when they're considering the application. In addition, the publisher is asked to submit a partial manuscript, and that includes the table of contents, the introduction, and 1 or 2 sample chapters, a picture list or illustration program, and then sample images from the project. The publisher should also submit 2 detailed peer reviews or reader reports. These should be dated and shouldn't be more than 3 years old. And then the publisher should also submit the author's response to these reports, which should not be more than 1 year old and should also be dated for the jury. In addition to the materials that the publisher provides, the author submits a few components as well. The author doesn't submit these separately, but gives them to the publisher to submit with the rest of the application. So this includes an author form, which is similar to the publisher form that I talked about, that's available as a PDF on the CAA website. The author's CV, a short 2-page narrative description or abstract of the project, and then also the response to the reader reports. So those are the application requirements for the Meese Fund and the Wyeth grant. The requirements for the Meese Authors Book Award are similar, although there are a few little changes, and the important thing to remember is that that application is mostly made by the author because the award is going to the author. So the author should submit an author's form, again, that's available on the website, a cover letter, which is from the author and not the publisher, describing the importance of the work, a narrative description or abstract, about 2 pages, no more, partial manuscript, table of contents, introduction, and 1 or 2 sample chapters, sample bibliography, which should also be submitted for the other grants. I don't think I mentioned that. Condensed version is appropriate, but the jury does prefer to see the full bibliography if possible. The author also supplies a dated response to the reader reports, sample images, and the author's CV. In addition, a large component of this application is the complete picture list or illustration program, and that should include sources, the rights that were requested to use those images, and costs related to those. And that will serve as the basis for the amount that's requested from the fund.
Can I just add one point? The image cost can be either actual or projected. In other words, the author does not have to have paid for the images, but needs to know the cost of the image.
Right.
Sorry.
So the author puts those materials together and submits those, and in addition, the publisher of the book submits 2 peer reviews directly to CAA. The author doesn't compile everything, and then a completed publisher's form, which again is on the website. It's basic questions about the book and the publication of the book. So the Meese Fund is awarded twice a year, in the spring and in the fall. The upcoming deadline is March 15th, and publishers are usually notified in June. And the fall deadline is September 15th, and publishers are generally notified in December. The Wyeth grant is awarded once a year. Traditionally, the deadline is September 15th. We haven't actually officially announced that grant yet, so stay tuned and check the website. And then the Meese Authors Book Award will be offered this spring with a March 15th deadline, and authors will be notified in June. You're welcome to submit the applications to me either by email or sending them through the mail. If you do send them as emails, please submit each component as a separate email attachment. It doesn't need to be separate emails, but they should be different files. You can either send them to me in an email or use Dropbox or a similar service. And then if you send them by mail, just make sure that everything is on 8.5 by 11-inch paper that's only been printed on one side.
Thank you, Alex. I know that's quite a bit of information, and as you can see, it's clearly outlined on our website, and there are the forms are easily available there. You can also submit questions to Alex directly after the program. And today we actually have we've received a number of very specific questions already about the grant application process that we'll go through in a minute. And if you'd like to submit, you can do so in several ways, and I think we have a slide that lists those. We can just show that quickly. Yeah, there we go. So the hashtag for Twitter is CAA Pub Grants. You can also go to YouTube to add comments, or Google Hangout, or email us at caabook@collegeart.org. Okay, so I wonder if we have Susan on with us. No, not yet. Okay, so now we'll then turn to Carl and ask Carl to give us the ins and outs of his experience applying for the Meese Authors Book Award. Carl?
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to share my experience about this application process. I was lucky enough to receive both the Meese Award and the Meese Authors Award. Or the publisher received one and I received the other. So I hopefully can answer any questions people have about either one of these. But certainly the grants have been very, very helpful to me. I think younger scholars hear a lot of scary things about how much the publication process will cost, and they're all true. The publication process is very expensive, and so grants like these are really helpful to making the book possible. But certainly it was worth it. I'm sort of at the end of the process now. My book is coming out later this month with beautiful color illustrations, which were really crucial for what I wanted to accomplish. My first piece of advice for people applying for this grant is just to get started early. I think it can be, this particular grant, at least to me, was a bit intimidating because of the number of documents that were required as part of the application. It was more materials than I'd ever submitted for a grant before. And so I definitely started early. I think it was really important to have good communication with my publisher very early on about how we wanted to move forward with the application process, since it is very much a collaboration between you and the publisher. So I was lucky to have a publisher with Toronto that was very, very responsive to me, and we collaborated throughout the process in getting all these materials ready. But certainly, the application for these grants is not something you can do at the last minute, since there are so many different documents and it requires so much collaboration between you and the publisher. And also, I was uncertain as I began applying sort of which application period I should apply for, but certainly you do have to wait until you really nailed down the details of your budget, the details of your image program. So I ended up waiting one more cycle than I thought I maybe needed to while we nailed down the details of that budget between me and the publisher. So definitely waiting for the right time to apply and leaving yourself plenty of time are my first two pieces of advice. One of the other parts of the application that seemed very different to me from other grants I'd applied for was the author's response to the anonymous reader report. So I thought I would just talk briefly about my thoughts surrounding producing that document. What it really felt like was important to me in this section, at least how I approached it, was to really demonstrate that I had heard the readers, that I really understood their comments, that I really thought about them. And it was really the place in the application where I felt like I tried to demonstrate my own understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of my book as the readers had pointed them out, and that I'd really engaged in a period of reflection about those strengths and weaknesses. So the way I sort of outlined that document was to first really, state back what I had heard from the readers. Obviously, the jury sees the reader reports as well, but I thought it was important to show that I had heard them, right? So to say what I felt like the comments had been, and then to kind of go through each one, addressing how I had approached revisions with those comments in mind. And this is one of the few documents for the grant that didn't have a specific length that was requested for it. I went ahead and wrote a fairly long document. I think it was 3 full single-space pages, really going into some depth about the edits and changes I had made to the book in response to those reader reports. So this sort of goes into the next, maybe the last substantive comment that I wanted to make, was just that with so many different statements requested for the grant, I really tried to be strategic or mindful about using each statement to advance a particular aspect of my project. So as I already mentioned, I used the response to readers as the place to really dig most into my recent writing and editing process and into how I saw the book's strengths and weaknesses, what I hoped it would do in the field. Then you also have the narrative description of the book, which is really where I kind of laid out the book's outline and scope and how it responded to earlier scholarship. So I sort of put that into that part. And then I decided that it would be in the cover letter where I really talked about the image program and how helpful the grant would be for the image program, and really the kind of intellectual aspects of the image program, why I felt like it was so important to have a certain quality and number of images in order for the book to accomplish what I needed it to accomplish. So I had these sort of 3 different formats in which to make my case to the jury, and there was certainly some repetition as I tried to hit certain themes about what I felt like was important or interesting about my project, but I really tried to use each one to accomplish something particular. The last thing I would just say, which is more of a practical thing, is a sort of good piece of advice that I would go ahead and apply for what you really need. I didn't know if I should apply for a smaller amount than what we really needed to get the book published, but we applied for what I thought was a very large amount, really everything we needed left after my other resources had been exhausted, and we were awarded the entire amount. So I think, leave it to the jury to cut your amount down. Don't sell yourself short in the amount that you ask for. Go ahead and really ask for what you need after you've outlined all of your different costs. And again, it's just great to try to be organized as you work through these image acquisitions, to keep track of your costs, to keep track of how much you're spending at each place. Because in some cases, you may have purchased the image initially years ago, but it's great if, as you're working on these larger projects, you can keep those data really well organized. So I think that's most of the advice that I had prepared to talk about, but again, I'm happy to answer any questions that come up.
Great, thank you so much, Carl. That was really interesting, and I think that last point is really important, that you should apply for what you need, and the jury will then decide what amount to award, and this list is currently left up to the discretion of the jury. So we're hoping that Susan will join us in a minute, but until she gets here, I think I'll just talk a little bit more about the peer review process and the author's response. Alex and us sit in the jury meetings in an ex officio capacity, so we do have some knowledge of the way that jurors look at this, and they rely fairly heavily on peer review reports and on the author's response. We try to include jury members from many different subject areas, but if there's no subject specialist, for instance, on a jury for a particular book, then they will want the knowledge from a specialist who's thoroughly read the manuscript and provided substantive comments. And the same goes for the author's response, particularly if there's a fair amount of constructive criticism in the peer review report. Then the jury's interested in knowing how the author responded to that and the ways in which they've edited and changed the manuscript. Alex, can you think of some other parts of the application process that are particularly important to the jury from your time spent in many jury meetings?
I mean, they do look at the budget, as I mentioned, so, and not every juror is going to be well versed in reading a budget, so it should be easy to understand, easy to read. Also, the chapters that the publisher chooses to put forward should really demonstrate the project as a whole. It's really not necessary to submit the entire manuscript. So finding one or two chapters that kind of give a good impression of what the book is about and the purpose of the book, and maybe any new scholarship or new interpretations are important.
And we did receive one question about this. Someone wants to submit a manuscript that has a design mock-up so that the entire manuscript is available as a PDF, and wants to know if they can submit the design mock-up rather than individual chapters and images, etc. And I would say that you can. You might suggest the chapters that would be most important for the jurors to read. Okay, and Alex, do you have other parts that you'd like to emphasize, or should we move on to questions? Or
I mean, the abstract is important.
Right. Every part is important, really, to the application. So we've had some technical difficulties getting Susan to join us today. So I think that we will move into the questions that we've received and see if that can provide you with additional information. Okay, so the first question is, can you apply to more than one grant at a time? And Alex, would you like to answer that?
You can apply to more than one grant at a time. The Meese jury and the Wyeth jury are separate, made up of separate jurors, so publishers shouldn't feel like they're applying to too many things, because those separate groups won't know. And also, because the Wyeth grant is for a smaller subject area, if you are applying to that grant, I would also, if you're applying to the Meese grant and your subject happens to fit in with the Wyeth grant eligibility, I would encourage publishers to also put forth an application to the Wyeth grant. Again, it should be a separate application with a separate cover letter, but as I hope you could see from my presentation of the application components, they're very similar. And then the author grant, which is separate, that the author can apply for those funds as well. So in theory, you could have a project one year that was in the running for the Meese Fund and the Wyeth grant, and then also the author applied to the Meese Mellon Authors Book Award. And I would encourage that. No way it's going to be judged unfairly because it's up for all three.
Okay, and another question, can books written in other languages be submitted? Alex?
Books written in other languages can be submitted, but the application should be in English so that the jury can assess it. You know, depending on the language, there isn't necessarily going to be someone that will be able to properly judge it. So the manuscript itself doesn't need to be translated, but you know, if the jury feels that it can't properly assess the book, then it won't.
Okay, and just to follow up with that, do any of CAA's publishing grants fund translations? And we actually did fund a translation in the Millard Meese Publication Fund provided an award for the translation of a publication that Penn State University Press is translating. And that's a rare occurrence, but it does happen. It would need to be, I believe this one's on Abby Warburg, and it would need to be something substantial that has to deal with art history, historiography, or some other important book that really needed an English language version. Okay, do you provide grants for independent scholars working with for-profit publishers? And the answer to that is pretty simple. It's yes, we do. Commercial presses are more than welcome to apply for grants, and also authors who are working with commercial presses are welcome to apply for the Meese Mellon Authors Book Award. And so, since we're on the topic of the Meese Mellon Authors Book Award, I have a question for Carl, and I wondered, you said that an author should wait for the right moment and they needed lead time in preparing the grant. I wonder if you could suggest a general amount of time that might be required for preparing your image list and your budget and gathering all the other materials for the application.
Yeah, sure thing. I think I felt like a month was certainly necessary given the amount of communication and collaboration that it takes between the publisher and the author in order to put all these things together. So I think certainly at least a month in advance, which right now we're 2 months in advance of the deadline, so it's plenty of time for people to get started with this. But yeah, I think waiting for the right time when these documents are easily producible, right? When your publisher can easily produce a budget, for example, and doesn't have to sort of make guesswork of the budget. Once it's really been nailed down, once your image list and image program has really been nailed down, then I think it can be certainly done within a few weeks or a month. But again, I wouldn't advise applying before you're really at the stage where those materials can be easily compiled.
Thank you, Carl. Let's see. Must submissions be ready to be published in order to be eligible? The answer to that is that while they don't have to be at the publication point, they have to have been accepted by a publisher and be under contract with a publisher. So that's really a question for a publisher, essentially, and what they accept in terms of a complete and ready manuscript. I have a specific question that I'll ask Alex to read and answer.
So this is for the Wyeth grant specifically, and the question is, because my book project addresses American artists working after 1970, but responding to the development of conceptual art of the 1960s, can I still apply for the Wyeth grant? So just to refresh your memory, the Wyeth grant is for books on American art through 1970. And in this specific case, it's sort of hard to tell from this one sentence, and I really would encourage anyone who isn't sure if their book is eligible to contact me, and I can, take a look at the abstract or take a look at the table of contents or maybe look at the image list and give you a better idea of whether or not the jury would consider this. In this particular case, if the book really does focus on works through the 70s, and it's only just sort of this response to the 60s mentioned in passing, I would say that it's probably not eligible for the Wyeth grant.
Okay, then I have a couple of questions that address sort of different issues. How many people of color in the past 40 years have received grants? And I don't actually have the answer to that question. I'm not actually sure that I could find it. I know that we do award grants to topics about people of color or artworks that made by people of color. We don't ask for that information on the grant application about the ethnic or identity of the applicant, so it's not really a question that I could easily answer, although I'd be happy to try to find some information about that for the person that submitted the question. Another interesting question is about readers and potential readers and peer reviewers. The user wrote in, is it appropriate for me to inquire from possible readers their availability to read my manuscript before the editor issues formal requests? It might save time in order to do this. And while it might be a time-saving device, I think there are a couple of problems with this, and one is that were you to decide on the readers, the publisher would not get an sort of objective viewpoint about the manuscript, and you would not get an objective viewpoint in the readers' reports. Most peer review is a double-blind process. The author and the reviewer do not know each other, and this is for everyone's benefit. A second problem would be conflict of interest. If you were to, and I'm not saying that the person sending in the question would, but if they were to ask their dissertation advisor or someone with whom they've had a personal relationship in the past, then this person would potentially present a biased view of the manuscript. And since the publication of a book is so important to an author's career, and possibly could have some monetary gain for the author, then that sort of intervention on the author's part would actually be a conflict of interest. So
I can read a couple of other questions we got. One is, are textbooks okay to submit? How about new editions of textbooks? I'd say no, textbooks are not okay to submit. As I said before, it's important that the material hasn't been previously published, so a textbook would not be eligible.
Okay, so I guess we're out of questions now. So in closing, I'm sorry that Susan couldn't make it with us here today. We do want to thank Carl very much for participating and offering his insights. Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for joining us. If there's some question that we didn't get to, please feel free to contact Alex at agershuny@collegeart.org. That's AGERSUNY at collegeart.org. And please apply for one of CAA's publication grants. Thank you.